Thanks for staying with News at Prime tonight. The Commission for Gender Equality is concerned at the high rate of child marriages in KwaZulu-Natal, the Eastern Cape and Gauteng. Police last week rescued a 16-year-old Ngobo girl in the Eastern Cape from marrying a 22-year-old man. Let's discuss this further. We're joined by the Commission's Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. Thank you so much for coming in today. Certainly when one looks at the ages 16 and 22, this is a relatively young man. When one thinks of this culture and practice, it's often ascribed to the older generations. Let's speak about how it is continuing.
Look, I think the Commission continues to be concerned about the issues of child marriages. It is something that, of course, globally, even at the UN and all the other different platforms in which we represent the country, it's a continuing concern. And of course, culture, as something that exists, as something that, of course, brings, community and a sense of belonging, is something that we also think is a good thing. But you do find instances where culture has been used to excuse criminality, where culture has been used to violate often children's rights, and in this instances, the rights of the girl child. And of course, in terms of our work in the country and across the different provinces, there are instances where the CGE is involved with different stakeholders from the police, the NPA, some media houses, especially local media, schools, to rescue young children from these practices of ukutwala or hushubedisa and child marriages.
Sure. On the one hand, there's the issue of the child who becomes the victim in the situation, but there's also the issue of the man who is involved. And I wonder, when you run your investigations, do you find that there's any thorough understanding from some of these individuals about the extent to which what is being done is in fact a violation of human rights?
I think, when you look at one of the core functions of the Commission, it's to protect gender equality. And one of the ways to protect gender equality is to protect the rights of women, young girls, and in this instance, those people who are affected by this. And why we support also the curriculum in terms of comprehensive sexuality education in schools is that it's during that structured learning where children can learn about their rights, where children can learn about things like consent, where children can understand the power dynamics between an older person and themselves and the young person and realize their own vulnerability. But what's more important is that children need to be taught where to go and how to seek help. Because once they notice that something is going on, once they hear something, they see something, often they can't do anything about that. And because these practices are happening within a context of a society that's already normalized it, it becomes even harder for a young child or a young girl to then have the bravery to speak up, right, against authority. And what's important is that we need to really hone in terms of telling children what their rights are, but more importantly, believing them when they do tell us that there are, situations that are happening. Abduction, of course, by definition, is something that you don't prepare for, but there is a lot of grooming as well that underpins a lot of what does happen.
Is there any pushback from these young men against this happening?
I mean, it's quite hard because I suppose by the time, the matter of abduction is foiled, or at least when young girls are rescued, it becomes a criminal justice issue, which it should become. But I think as a broader society, we do need to have discussions around why is it that despite the constitution that we have, despite the House of Traditional Leaders, right, despite faith-based organizations and leaders within communities, why these practices are still in a lot of instances hush-hush, but also allowed to happen. And I think we need to hold everybody accountable broadly and more than just the individual. The individual should be dealt with through the criminal justice system, but through our legal outreach and through our public education and information campaigns, we hope to give communities information. But what's important, I think, also, which is a big part of what we do, is holding everybody accountable. Sure. And it should be, all the communities should be concerned.
You raise an important thing around communities, because if they took a stand, it would certainly be much easier. It would make the work of even the police easier in terms of identifying such practices and clamping down on them. I wonder, when you pay attention to the families, what is often the role of families? Are they complicit in this? What is in it for the families that allows this practice to continue taking place?
Yeah. I think we should be concerned about the number of young children that are raising themselves within families. We should be concerned that in many instances, it's not just even the parents, it's uncles and aunts who are involved in marrying children off, which is a criminal activity. You have a trade-off where, for example, there could be a certain member who's indebted to someone else, an adult, and in exchange or to clear off that debt, a girl child is being traded in that process. All of this is against violations. All of these are against human rights standards. But it's happening and people are seeing it and knowing it. And it's at that level, in the community level, where we really need to start engaging. But also people need to see justice happening. They need to see that there are consequences to this type of behavior. You can do all the public information you want. You can do all the outreach you want. But if those that need to go through the criminal justice system don't often end up with convictions, it means then we don't take this issue seriously.
It sounds like human trafficking.
It is, and if you look at the definition thereof, children cannot consent to marriage. Children cannot consent to any type of trade-off by any means, by anybody. And so I think it's also important for children themselves to be affirmed in terms of they do have rights. I mean, the African Charter, looks at children and affords them and affirms the fact that they have these rights from birth. And I think our constitutions does the same. And we really do need to approach children with the respect and also protect their dignity, because this is about dignity as well.
All right, let's leave it there for tonight. Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, she is with the Commission for Gender Equality.